Wondering what life is really like on Canada's wild and crazy West Coast? This podcast is all about the people, the places, and Vancouver Island Time. Together, we'll explore this island paradise, a combination of ocean, city, and country living. We'll meet the fabulous locals, such as the Fudge Fairy and the Chicken Lady, who have chosen Victoria and Vancouver Island as their home. And we'll learn what makes this place unique and special to those who live here. And now, your host of Vancouver Island Time, Jane Johnston.
Hi, everybody. It's Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at Remax Camosun, and I'm here with Kristen Yarker. And we are going to be talking about the downtown Victoria, kind of Fairfield area. And how long have you lived here?
I've lived here, I call it Rockland, so it's hard to, we're kind of on the cusp of a number of different neighborhoods. But yes, I've lived here for 6 years.
And what made you choose this area?
I chose this area because I love how close I am to so much. I do own a car, and I will hop in a car to go out of town, but I don't like to have to use a car to get things done. And so I love that I can walk to do all of my errands, my grocery store, farmer's market, the gym, hairdresser, everything within walking distance. But also the ocean is within walking distance. So I love kind of having that neighborhood vibe, that village within walking distance, but then so much at my door, but then also a little quieter than being right downtown.
Okay, so where do you go for things like groceries? Because you sort of have your choice between two different areas here.
I think I have a choice like 6 different areas, really, because walking distance to downtown, Fernwood, Cook Street Village, and I know you've had people on your podcast talking about those areas before, and then Oak Bay is within walking distance as well. Bit of a longer walk from this side of Rockland, but especially in the summer, I love a longer walk into Oak Bay. Let me see, what did I say? Downtown, Fernwood, Cook Street Village, Fairfield, and Oak Bay, so I guess 5.
So culturally, really, you get your choice between a number of different areas.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's kind of like we have our own things in Rockland here, but you really can be a part of whichever, all of the neighborhoods, really. So it's great that way. So if I'm feeling more like getting dolled up and going out for dinner or something, I can go to the Livet or any place downtown. If I'm looking for a little more like a quiet tea or something, I can go to Oak Bay. If I'm feeling more like kind of a more edgy vibe, then I go to Fernwood. So yeah, and then I can just go down to Cook Street Village for a little ocean time too.
So you moved here from Vancouver, right? Back to Victoria. And what made you make the decision to move back to Victoria?
Well, it kind of surprised me, to tell the truth. I'd been living in Vancouver for a long time and had loved it, but I had the second part of my childhood here, and my parents still live here. So I came back for a visit of some childhood friends and my parents, and I just had this like full body feeling of wanting to move back. And I was like, where did that feeling come from? But I decided to follow that and jump on it. And so I moved my business here and was back and forth for a number of years as I kind of gradually moved my business over here. But now I'm here for the last 2 years. I've been here full time.
So what do you think, like if somebody was moving from the East Coast and they were comparing Victoria to Vancouver, what would you say are the big differences? Give me 3.
They do have completely different feels. So Vancouver is definitely a big city and has that city vibe, where Victoria, I akin Victoria right now to like a 13-year-old boy, where it's no longer the small town that it used to be, but it's not quite a big city yet. So it's kind of an in-between time. And so it's really exciting to be here because it has many of the great things of a bigger city, but not some of the more negative trappings yet. Like the traffic is still relatively good for most areas. As I said, I don't live in downtown, but I can walk everywhere, which is great. I came back here for a couple of years on a contract where I was just here for a few days a week in the mid 2000s, and it was a totally different city then. After 5 o'clock, you couldn't find a grocery store open. You couldn't find a place for a cocktail unless you were, 21, those sorts of things. And yet now we have 24-hour grocery stores. Now there is a time vibe in Victoria that is all ages friendly, which didn't have before. So I really love that we're in that interim stage, but it still seems, it still has that quiet and kind of a quaintness to it with those big city attributes as well. So I love that mix.
Yeah, I went to school in Kingston. I did my teaching degree in Fredericton. And having come from Toronto, I always thought that this size of city really is a perfect size. But I do see the growing pains, like when I was living in Toronto, of how we're going to have to amalgamate, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's fairly ridiculous that there's, different police for different neighborhoods. And if you go over one line, then you're in a different police zone and things like that. So there's a lot of practicalities that will have to happen as we grow. Kind of, as I said, like that 13-year-old boy, like a lot of decisions made now will have big ramifications as we become an adult, like as we become a big city. But it's pretty exciting to be here at this time in Victoria's development, so that through our voting, through community volunteering, and that we can be having that impact on what Victoria becomes.
Right. So the greater municipality, the greater CRD, Greater Victoria, is 13 municipalities, and there's about 370,000, but Victoria itself is only about 80,000 people.
Okay, I didn't know those stats, but yes, Victoria itself is quite small compared to the bigger city of Victoria.
Okay, so tell me, you sound like you're a foodie. Where do you like to eat?
Well, what I always like to say is there is no excuse for having mediocre food living here in Victoria. There's so many amazing places to eat. So really, it depends on what you're in the mood for. And so if I'm just looking for something kind of close by in my neighborhood here, if in the evening, if I'm meeting a friend or a girlfriend, I love the Livet. It's up above, has a beautiful patio for the summer, and it's great for cocktails, bites, or a full entree.
Where is that exactly?
It's beside the Royal Theatre. Also within walking distance, if you're looking for something a little more casual, there's great pho, there's great taco places, and I love Bee Love, which is a vegetarian, lots of raw food, very West Coast. Very West Coast, very classic Victoria West Coast food, but delicious and super healthy.
Do you find like there's that also has been sort of becoming more sophisticated, the choice available to people? So there are lots of vegetarian restaurants and sort of specializing in raw or whole or different types of foods.
Yeah, absolutely. For the size of our population, we're such a foodie destination. Like think of like a San Francisco, but with only our population. Like any type of food you want, there's somebody excelling at that here. I would say, well, I wouldn't say quite everything. There's some kind of through the African diaspora and more Asian represented here, which is great. So there's a few gaps, but as I said, beautiful West Coast food. And you have to try the sushi when you're here too.
Where do you go for sushi?
I often will walk down to Cook Street Village, lots of places downtown. So yeah, I don't have one absolute favorite because so many are good.
I went to Nudo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And it's kind of more of a fusion modern thing. I recently tried Dobo Sala, which is a crazy combination of different cultures' foods, but it all works.
Are you a brunchy person?
Not as much as the typical Victoria stereotype, but I have to say, since it's in my neighborhood, that everybody lines up for the Blue Fox. I don't understand it because I find big portions of mediocre food that you wait in line a long time for. Where the Avalon Cafe is a few doors down, like about a block down, and it's all they have this homemade oaten toast and homemade preserves. And you get a poached egg or an eggs benny. The hollandaise is homemade and beautiful, and they ask you how you want your eggs poached, and they deliver them right. So don't wait in the big lineup. Don't follow the crowds to the Blue Fox. Definitely go to the Avalon Cafe. It's like a little secret gem.
Okay, well now it's out there. Okay, what about for entertainment?
For entertainment, again, being here in Rockland, there's a lot of different choices. I love being able to walk to the art gallery of Victoria. It's within walking distance here. There's the Langham Court Community Theatre, if you're into that.
Which is nice and intimate, that little theater.
Yeah, it's community theater. It's great. And it's good quality community theater, which is amazing. The Royal Theatre is close by. There's the downtown movie theaters. If you're
The Belfry.
The Belfry is totally within walking distance. And so, yeah, it's a great place to not have to drive and find parking in order to access everything that's going on. I also love public speaking. And so there's a great public speaking event called Confabulation. It happens once a month, and people take the stage and tell a story from their life. And so I love going downtown to catch that once a month.
Tell me more about that. Tell me, how is that organized?
It's 2 women organize that, and I understand that it's originally out of Montreal, or there's a Montreal hub. So there's a few cities in Canada that have confabulation, but Victoria's confabulation, it always sells the whole room out. I mean, I don't know if it's sold out or if they squeeze a few extra people in the room capacity because it's packed, and you can get a beer if you like. But instead of you picture stand-up comedy, but instead of a comic set, people tell a story from their life, and it's dramatic or it's funny, but it has to be true to them. And there's always a theme every month, so it has to relate to the theme somehow. 6 speakers, so there's 3, and then a little intermission where you can refresh if you need at the bar, and then another 3 speakers. It's a really fun time.
And do you sign up to be a speaker ahead of time?
At the end of each month, they open it up to anybody in the room who wants to be a speaker the following one. They also reach out and request people to be speakers. I spoke about this time last year on the stage and had been invited to do so, from a story from my life. And then I hadn't heard of it before, but I was happy to do it. And I found this is amazing. And so now I go more often.
How do you find it being an entrepreneur in Victoria?
I find it great. I find that it's interesting because we are more laid back here, and there's definitely an island vibe for sure. I love what you call your podcast Island Time, because there definitely is an island time. Although I have to say that having been raised here, it's not so much slower here now with the internet and that than when it used to be.
I do find we're very techy here.
Absolutely. Yeah, because the internet creates an opportunity for worldwide level businesses to be happening on our little island here in the Pacific. But I find it's great being here in the entrepreneurial community. I do some business networking, and that people are very supportive. And I find that we still are the exception, being the entrepreneurs here in Victoria. But when you do find other entrepreneurs, then we appreciate each other and we really support each other, because it's still more of a minority thing here versus in Vancouver. People usually have more of a hustle, are a little more career oriented kind of in the general sphere. And as you said, you grew up or you were part of Toronto. And so it's definitely like that's Toronto's main thing. So here it's not the Victoria's kind of main thing, but when you tap into that community, super supportive. And there's people building really cool businesses here. So there are true entrepreneurs happening here.
I think one of the challenges here for an entrepreneur is just the fact that it's doesn't have the population to support somebody doing entrepreneurship full time, all like different types of entrepreneurs. Like in Vancouver, you can be a specialist in a small area and then you have the population to support you. Here, that's has been the challenge in the past, but I think that may be changing.
Yeah, I would say that that's not necessarily true now. I would say that particularly if you're harnessing online, then there's that opportunity to niche to the whole world, of course, from here. But if you're doing a local, I see 2 types of businesses thrive here. One is a very specific niche, but that is very needed here. And the other are the more broad, that appeal to a number of different types of populations here. Yeah, it's true that, you can't do a local niche here the same way as in Toronto or in Vancouver, unless you get it just right.
For me, though, I found a lot of people have trouble transitioning from work to entrepreneurship, but I found it very supportive.
It's definitely a tough transition, and yeah, that it is. And I think that's why so many people in business don't survive. And it's not necessarily that the business wasn't the right concept, but it is a really tough transition, and it really does take stubbornness or grit. There's lots of different words for that, but to tough it out. And then if you do, then it will rise, but it's a tough grind for sure.
Yeah, I went from teaching where I was like, I have this motion because I felt like I was flailing myself when I became an entrepreneur, how hard it was.
Absolutely. It's a steep learning curve. And I heard this said before I jumped into entrepreneurship full time. And it's not that I didn't believe it, but I didn't really understand it. And it's one of those kind of lived experience things. But becoming a successful entrepreneur isn't so much about the business, but it's about the personal development. Who you become in creating a business that is successful is profound.
Yeah, exactly. And it reflects you and your inner beliefs and everything.
Everything. You have to, and the ability to learn things and making decisions and getting through the tough times and maintaining faith during that, or deciding, you know what, this isn't the right direction and it's time to drop this now and change courses but stay in business. There's a million decisions. There's nobody going to tell you what's right or wrong, or there's a gazillion people who will tell you you're right or wrong, and they'll all have different opinions. But I find it very fulfilling, and I wouldn't make any other choice, but I definitely agree that it's the toughest road to choose.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to end there right now, and we're going to come back and we're going to be talking about the Rockland area of Victoria. So Rockland, Cook Street, Fernwood, we're kind of a trifecta here. So stay tuned, and we'll be back after this message.
Vancouver Island Time is brought to you by the Briar Hill Group at RE/MAX Camosun, Victoria, where we bring local expertise and global presence to your property.
Hi, everybody. It's Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at RE/MAX Camosun and host of Vancouver Island Time. I'm here with Kristen Yarker. We're going to be talking about her business, which is
Kristen Yarker Nutrition. I'm a dietitian, and I provide professional nutrition for performance and pleasure.
What kind of performance?
I support people who expect a lot out of themselves in life. So busy professionals, business owners, CEOs, people who demand a lot of themselves and need to get a lot done in a day. And so they need to have amazing energy and health in order to achieve their goals.
And what about athletes?
Athletes too.
Okay, how did you get into that?
I've been interested in food for my whole life, really. I always like to share this story of when I was little. I would be in the backyard, and there was a couple of tomato plants that my mom it was kind of your classic 1980s suburb house. There wasn't a lot of big vegetable gardens or whatever, but there'd be like 2 tomato plants that we weren't allowed to touch and 1 cherry tomato plant that we'd be allowed to touch. And I figured out that I could pick a cherry tomato, take a tiny little bite, suck out the inside, pick a mint leaf, stuff it in the tomato, and pop it in my mouth. And I figured that out at like 6, and that's how I would eat them. So I think I was always destined to do something in food. And then I was an athlete in my youth, and so I became interested originally in sports nutrition, and then also the sports that I was doing, running and gymnastics, as well as dancing. There were a lot of girls who started with me who then developed eating disorders. So I became really interested in nutrition, but also a lot of the psychological side, like why we make the food choices we do. So that interested me from a young age. I found out there was something called a dietitian and never looked back.
So why do we make the food choices we make? I know, like my mom passed away, and I know that I've been using food as kind of a comfort thing for myself. And, I packed on like 10 pounds. So is that normal? And how do I lose it?
It definitely is normal. We use food for many different ways in our life. And that's something that I recognize and I work with people around, because a lot of diets and a lot of nutrition advice treats food as only fuel for our bodies. And it is fuel for our bodies, but we're not just our physical selves, right? We're mental selves, our emotional selves, our spiritual selves. And so food feeds each of those roles. It can support our emotions. It has an effect on our mental health. And also food is a way that we connect with each other and we express love and gathering and sharing food. So food meets all of those needs. And so recognizing what the root cause is of our food choices and using the behavior change science to instill different habits, and also identifying maybe there's some grieving process and that you need to be doing, and that's what the way to be taking care of your emotions through other means, and will mean that you can use food less in that process. But grief is also an enduring thing, right? So it's okay that you've used food emotionally for this time. And so perhaps doing some work to address the emotions through other means will mean you'll have a more full self-care toolbox so that you don't need to use the eating as your go-to tool.
I find mostly it's also like just a question of planning. It's like I don't plan well because I'm focused on other stuff, but when I plan, I'm okay.
Totally true. I mean, it's like anything in life, right? Like it doesn't just happen. Business success doesn't just happen. You create a plan and you work the plan and it happen, and that's how you're like, oh, it just happened. Well, no, it was a result of everything you put in place. And so, yeah, I'm also known for being really practical, which isn't the best like marketing slogan, like the practical person. But what I find is that it needs to be practical and needs to fit in your life versus changing your life in order to follow some diet. That's not going to work long term. And that's what I think is great, is that the marketplace, what we're finding in the grocery store, all these things, there's more and more things that make healthy eating easier, because they know that there's a lot of us who have busy lives, but we want to eat healthy too, and we don't want to make it a choice of either or. And it's totally possible to do the both, but yeah, it takes a little bit of planning.
Yeah, so I noticed you wrote a cookbook. Tell me about the cookbook.
So it's called the Easy Sugar Detox Cookbook, 125 recipes for a healthy, sugar-free lifestyle. And it's really a rational voice in that space. So there's a lot of like sugar detox stuff that is, get rid of all of these foods and make smoothies with 8 million ingredients every morning that take 3 hours. And it's not that complicated. So what my cookbook is about is 125 practical, easy recipes that don't include sugar, because the reality is that most of us do eat too much sugar and it's not good for our health in many, many ways. And so the way to get off the sugar is to do more cooking yourself with real foods. And so I shared simple recipes in order to do that.
But you talk about in your book about the different types of sugars, and I thought that was interesting. I've always given fructose a bad rap, but I mean, it's naturally occurring. And one of the things I find with some of the diets that say, like a keto diet says, no sugar, right? No fruit sugars, no fruit at all. And it's too hard for me, I think, to do that sort of diet.
Yeah, I don't say like globally, no one should be on this or no one should be on that, because when I'm working with clients individually, that's what I do, is I personalize my recommendations for that individual. But the reality is that extreme diets, whatever they may be, and keto does omit a lot of food groups, so I do put that in that category. It's not going to be practical for a lot of people. And so really, I'm not anti like fruit, for example. Now, you can eat too much, for sure. But I don't think there's reason to be like afraid of a banana. But eating 4 bananas in a day, probably too much, especially for those of us who are over 40. And the reality is our bodies can't handle as much sugar, as many carbs as it could when we were 20.
So in your cookbook also, you sort of, which I thought was unique, was when you talk about the food prep, you're also talking, okay, while you're preparing this, you might as well make some extra for down the road.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm all about maximizing your time in the kitchen. And I don't mean maximizing as in spending more time in the kitchen. I mean maximizing what you get done when you're in the kitchen. Because I'm running my own business, so I don't have like all day long. As much as I love cooking, I don't have all day long every single day to cook. And so really it's about how many meals, snacks, and even meal components that you can make all at once. So things like if I'm turning on the oven, I make sure that I filled that oven. I don't just have one dish on the top rack and nothing underneath. I want to be putting in there maybe I'm roasting some squash, maybe I'm roasting some beets for a salad bowl, like a Buddha bowl, or to warm up for leftovers. Yeah. And I'm all about, making sure that you're maximizing what you get out of your time that you're putting in.
The other thing you do, which in the book, which is really good, is you define sort of like the fact that we have simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates, and like eating white bread, you can have two different types of bread. You have a very different glycemic effect from these.
Yeah, so it's called the glycemic index, and that's a measure for foods that do contain carbohydrates. Basically, it's how quickly they spike our blood sugar and make us crash again. And what I want people to avoid is what I call the blood sugar roller coaster. So when you spike by eating something with a high glycemic index, and then you crash, and then what does that make you do? That makes you crave more sugar, and so then you go up and down all day long, and you feel awful. And so what I recommend is eating in a way that creates a steady blood sugar. And so it involves making smarter carb choices and not too much carbs overall. And then also protein and fats and not being afraid of fat and making sure you're getting enough protein, because those help stabilize our blood sugars as well.
So Canada's food guide changed recently. How did it change?
It changed about a year ago now, and it changed a number of different ways. The most significant ones are that they moved away from the kind of conceptual rainbow image, which people never totally grasped. That the biggest arc was supposed to be what you eat the most of, and then inwards from there, which, as a dietitian, I knew that, but not what I recommend. It was just far too fancy, esoteric. And so now it represents a plate, and it shows you what your plate kind of should look like. And so that was a great move in a more practical direction. Again, that practicality coming up. It also merged. In the past, there was a separate dairy food group, milk on alternatives, and now that's merged it into the protein group. And it used to be called meat and alternatives, and there's dairy and alternatives. And so recognizing a more plant-based movement, now there's vegetables and fruit, the protein-based foods, and then starch foods. So it doesn't, people are like, again, exclamatory kind of extremist things are what gets a lot of clicks and a lot of attention online. So it's not like, dairy's out or whatever. It's like, no, if you choose to eat dairy, it's still included, but it doesn't need its own separate food group. It follows in with these other foods. And then the last more significant change is the recognition of including more plant-based meals or snacks in your lifestyle. So again, it doesn't mean everybody needs to be vegan, but even if you eat meats or poultries and are more omnivorous, having more plant-based meals in your eating habits.
Yeah, actually, I heard something on the CBC about that too, just in terms of the environment, focusing a little bit more on plant-based diet will lower the impact of farming on the planet.
Definitely, for a lot of the choices. I mean, you can pick and choose some exceptions and that, but yes, tends to, instead of raising the crops to feed the animals that then we eating the plants ourselves is more efficient from feeding the planet population, as well as it lowering the environmental cost overall, which, I mean, we're human beings are a part of our environment, so separating our health from the planet's health really doesn't work.
Okay, so you meet with a client and you develop a plan. When do you find that they start to kind of naturally, when does the new habit become habitual?
It's different from person to person and habit to habit. So I love to be able to say exactly this many days.
3 weeks.
Yeah, but it's and that's what the behavior research shows. I mean, there's a lot of things that says this many days, but really it's related to who is the person and how complex, like what is the habit. So I do work individual sessions with some people, but the way I work mostly with people is I do work one-to-one. I don't do like group work type of stuff. And I have 2 services. One is a 40-day service, because that gets people kind of over that hump and gets people really implementing those changes. And that gets people feeling pretty good with the habits. I also have like a slower implementation plan, and that's 6 months, and we just do one habit at a time. I'm a big fan of the book Atomic Habits. I don't know if you've read that one, but it's all about how small changes create a totally different trajectory in your life. And I love that recognition. And so my 6-month program is about that. We make one single change every 2 weeks. You just focus on one thing. But when you look back 6 months later, you're like, wow, I've changed my lifestyle. And it was so easy. So I have those two different ones. One for the 40 days are people who are like, I need to make change now. I need to be seeing differences sooner. That's who I am. Yeah. And then the other one is the more gradual, and both are effective, but it's better than just like, a 10-day challenge or those types of things, or single session. For most of us, that's not enough to make change.
Okay, so who is your ideal client?
My ideal client are people who are professionals themselves, and they value what a professional brings to a life, to a business. And so I work with people who are ready to get off kind of that diet guilt sort of cycle of these short-term quick fixes that then don't work, and then you feel worse about yourself, who are ready to make a more intelligent, mature choice of creating lifestyle habits like long term, and focusing on the habits, which then allows the body to, if it's carrying extra weight, if your blood sugars are out of whack, it allows it to arrive at a better place. But focusing on the scale and moving that dial, doing whatever it takes, we've gotten past that. So I help people who are ready to address the root cause of what's going on.
Okay. And then, so how do they get in touch with you?
The best way is through my website, which is KristenYarker.com. And to book the information call there, it's an opportunity for me to find out about each person individually and answer any questions about my approach. And then that way we can together determine if we're a good fit.
Okay, so if you want more information about your food and how you are eating, you can contact Kristen. If you want more information about the Rockland area, downtown Victoria, Fernwood area, contact me. I'm Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at RE/MAX Camosun. Take care and have a great day.
Welcome to the neighborhood. We hope you have had some insight into West Coast living. If you know of someone or someplace that should be highlighted in our podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Please go to VancouverIslandTime.com and click on our Connect button. See you next week on Vancouver Island Time with Jane Johnston.